Hello and welcome to another episode of the Born Too Late podcast, where I, Jay Castro, and my friend Josh Rutledge talk to musicians, journalists, broadcasters, label owners, or anyone making a fuss in the world of underground music right now. Our conversation with the infamous Mr. Jeffrey Pop continues. This time we talk all about his band Fashionism, his stint playing with the legendary Smugglers, the greatness that was 2000s rock, the future of the Tranzmitors, and so much more. So get your bearings, remove any loose fitting clothing, because this is part 2 of our Jeffrey Pop episode.
When every day's feeling like a Monday morning, staying out late, kinda gets boring. Do what you wanna when you wanna do something now. I'm getting older by day, younger at night. I need a little something to feel alright. Yeah, do what you wanna when you wanna do something now. Yeah, you do what you wanna when you wanna do something now. Chances are you've made some choices, but I don't hear no inner voice.
So we'll transition into fashionism now. Jay and I are huge fashionism fans,
Cool.
and but in agreement that this is one of the best bands of recent years, this modern era of the last 20 years.
Oh, hands down.
Yes.
Hands down.
So I'm just curious, like, what was the inspiration for this band when you put the band together, and kind of what were you trying to do with fashionism?
Well, I mean, like Josh and I put together Fashionism. That was like, and we like, and I'd known Josh since, like, funny enough, like Josh, his brother and sister, I was friends with. So when we met, he was like a little kid, like proper little kid, you know. And so I like knew his older brother and sister, and we were friends like when we still lived in Kamloops. And then so but we ended up like, but Josh and I've known each other for, I've literally known him since he was like a kid, since like a little guy. And then, but we just stayed friends. And then years later, then like, of course, we're living in the same building. We're like, oh, we could start a band. Like, you know, like we were just talking about it. And at the time I like really wanted to, cause the Transmitters kind of weren't able to, the Transmitters never technically ever broke up, which is why that band still exists. But it was just like logistically, everybody in that band had kids. And it was like, it was one of those things where that band couldn't function just because everybody's schedules were so crazy. It was one of those cases where we just couldn't make it happen because everybody had those things. And so Fashionism was just like, it was able to happen because it was like everybody in the band had a lot less. I was the only one who had a more compromised situation as far as like scheduling going and stuff. Everyone's busy, but it was like different busy. And so Josh and I started that band, but the idea was like, I really wanted to start a band that kind of had the ridiculousness of glam, like in the sense that it totally had the showmanship. I love that stuff. Like, I mean, like, I like have no shame when it comes to the fact that I want to go, like when I see a band, I want them to feel like they love their band. Like you should be on stage thinking that you are the best band in the world. Like, that's kind of like the attitude that I always go into it. It's just like every band that you start is like, oh yeah, this is going to be the one. Like, oh, this record's going to be the best record I've ever made. Like I kind of think that if you go into it with that attitude, I mean, yeah, whether that works, who cares? But it's just like, but that should still be the point. You should always, you should always kind of think that your own band is kind of your favorite band, because it's like, even though you love other bands and they're maybe more important or whatever you want to say, you know, they're the bands that you love, but your band, like the one that you're in, the one that you and your friends are doing, that's the fucking best band in the world. Always. Like, period. Like, you should like be on that stage thinking, we're doing this right now, fuck the rest of you. Like no other band is better right now. And I kind of figure that if you go into it with that kind of mindset, then if at least if nothing more, you like totally leave whatever you've done being like, yeah, that was rad, and like I'm super happy with how that went. Whether anybody else cares, like, who cares? Like, what does that even matter? Like, it's just like, if people are into it, then that's cool. But if they're not, you get to like fully know that you did it exactly the way you wanted to do it. And so Fashionism was sort of like for me was like, oh, I wanted to be. I had all these songs, but I really didn't want to play anything. Like I wanted to just try and just be like a front person.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was funny, and so Josh was, and so that it just worked out that way. So Josh, at first, Josh and I would kind of work out the songs. I would still sort of like come up with the song, write the song, and then, but without a question, like, I mean, like beyond that, it's just like once Robin and Alex were in the band and everyone sort of did their part, everybody was equal parts. Like it was like, like I understand that like I would show up with songs and that's how the writing process worked. But by no means was it like me at all. It was like the reason why it was good is because all four of us made it what it was. And so it was just like, but we had like crazy stuff. Like I made like these 30-foot banners for the shows that would hang like,
wow.
So it was like, the idea was like, like when you think of like the Roman Empire or like, like kind of like a sort of like a Soviet kind of vibe where like everything's super epic and everywhere you go or like, and so the whole imagery was supposed to be, and I remember at the initial concept was I was going to make like a podium type thing so that you'd sit there and it was almost like that, like that Killing Joke video, 80s. And he's like sitting there like giving that sermon.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like that kind of vibe. I'm like, oh yeah, and I can deliver like that. But then we realized the logistics of hauling around one of those things to shows. but we did like really make an effort to like, and everybody, and there was like a color concept, which ended up being really funny because it ended up being like, it was like, well, what are the colors? And I'm just like, okay, well, we chose blue, white, and black. Sort of arbitrarily, but also because like that was easy for me because those were also like kind of the football colors for my team. So I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. Like no one else needs to care, but I can. And then it ended up being really funny because it ended up also being the national colors for Estonia, which we didn't know at the time, but we did a tour of the Baltics. And
really,
when we got there, we had like, the tour was really wild. It was like Finland and Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia and stuff. And when we did that tour, it was really wild being in that country because we were doing all these interviews like, are you like an Estonian nationalist band? Like from Canada? Like this. But I think there's something to be said, like when you see a show or when you see a band and you're just like, oh, that's the band, like, I mean, like, if people want to get on stage and do their thing and like, I don't really care. Like that's your business. But I mean, like whatever. But I mean, like for me, like, I mean, like it's the whole package is part of the fun. If you like, when you look, it's the same as like a record. Like, when you look at a record, there's those records that you like, but you kind of wish they didn't have such a shitty cover. Think, oh man, like I wish that record didn't look like that. Cause you actually kind of like that record a little bit less than you probably really would. Because it kind of seems like it's dumb or like, it's like, there's something weird. There's something just off. Right. Or like, when you like, and it's just like, I don't know whether this is just us being like superficial or whether we're looking for things or whether it's just, whatever it is. But when you see a band and it's just like, and it's like, oh, that song was kind of rad, but there's, you're judging it. Like there's something that doesn't line up for you. It's just like, and that's bullshit. That's on me. Like, I mean, if I'm not liking a band because of the way they look, like that's kind of a crap reason not to like a band. But I mean, like, but at the end of the day, it's just like, well, I can't deny my senses, like this is where we get into like this is where our conversations get philosophical, right? Like we can get into like Descartes, where like the only thing, it's like, it's not necessarily a truth, but if you allow your beliefs to be what they are, the only way that you can actually sort of understand the information that you gain is through your senses. And so if you trust your senses and you trust that your senses are your truth, even if you don't understand them as a belief, but then you can sort of like treat them as that's your truth, that's your reality, right? And so like if you like, and then I guess like the other, whatever, we won't get into that. That conversation can get a little bit slippery into like, you're talking about Locke and James and all this crap, right? And then, but anyways, but the idea though is like, so when you see a band and you're just like, oh, okay, like my ears are hearing it, I love it, but my eyes are seeing something and I'm just like, oh, it's not right, like, and it's just like. And there's a reason why we it all lines up for us, and it's just like, that doesn't mean that it has to be that way, but for me, for each individual who's engaging it, there's something that works for you, and it's just like, and you can not like a band that has all the everything seems like it should work, but it doesn't, and you don't always know why. And it's just because something, and a lot of times it's something really superficial, but it's
Yeah.
just what it is. And it's just like trying to like quantify it or like break it down for yourself. It'll just do your head in, because it's just like, just trust that you don't like it because you don't, or that there's a reason why it doesn't line up for you. And so my logic is then whatever band that you're going to do, don't put limiters before you even start. So if you like, then of course they're going to have a negative response to the idea that you've actually been like, yeah, we're going to wear matching outfits and we're going to have this and we're going to have this stage stuff and all like these kind of things, and like that's not real. And it's just like, and that's fine, you know, like that's just how they're also sort of perceiving it. But I mean, like that's not how I do it. I'm like, no, it's like everybody, you know, you do that. There's the phone calls. What is everyone going to wear? It's like, oh, what guitars are you going to play? Oh, we should use those different guitars because then they match on stage and that look really cool. You know, like you think about all that kind of stuff, because it's like, because when you see it, it's awesome. You know, like, and usually our favorite bands have done that. Like it's very rare that a band that really is great doesn't have all factors lining up. And then
Right.
usually the bands that have to do like that overcompensate, like there's bands that are relatively, they don't do a lot with their stage show. Those songs better be shit hot, because that's all you got at that point, right?
Right.
Like, or you better just like have like some kind of charisma as a front person or something. Like there's got to be something else, because if it's just the songs, there's a lot of good songs out there. You know, like there's a lot of people who can write good songs. There's gotta be something more, you know?
Oh yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. You mentioned the Hives earlier when you're talking about that.
Yeah.
I think you tend, okay, like if a band has great songs and they look great up on stage, it has that much more of an impact. You know, one of the things I always remember when I saw the Hives, I don't know, a few years ago, all of their roadies were wearing full ninja outfits
Yeah. That's amazing.
with the hood. I mean,
Yeah.
they looked like ninjas, and I was sitting there going, "What the hell?" But it was fantastic,
That's
and
so
I'll
good. I mean, they were
always remember
so
that.
that band was so good to see live, because it was just like, I mean, they were great. I mean, I like that band too, but I mean, like,
Yeah,
but it was just like so instant. You sit there, and once everybody's on stage and you're looking at it, and you already know that's the band. Like, you know, when you see a band and it's just like, and it's like somebody just like calls it in, like they just don't care, like, or they didn't even try. Like if I see somebody on stage with fucking flip flops, I'm out. Like I barely even can handle, if you can't even be bothered to put on pants. Like if you show up and decide like shorts somehow are justified, even like hardcore bands that are just like, yeah, I'm wearing shorts. It's just, dude, you're not at the gym. You don't like, I realize
beach.
you're gonna do your fucking pit destroyer power moves and stuff like that, and you need to get your knees up in the air, but you can still do that with a pair of jeans. Like at least, like I don't like, especially like a new band. Like if you've never heard them before, and you go up there and you like see a band, and you're just like, oh, cool. Like they put in some effort. Like they didn't just like crawl out of bed and just like not even bother. Like you didn't even bother to cut the ends of your strings off your guitar. It's just like they're all flailed. Like that. It's just like, come on. Like, I mean, like I'm not asking for much. You know, a little bit of effort, you know? Just like, you know.
You know, it's funny, like what you were saying earlier. One of the things I used to love is when I used to be able to go to a show and I can pick out the guys in the bands in the audience.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I learned that from the Smugglers, I think. Like as far as like that was the first band that I was engaged in where I'm like, where that was kind of drilled into me. Like, cause I saw them, and like the first time that, I mean, we would put on shows, but at the time, like early on at least, like all the bands that you're seeing, everyone kind of, I mean, people look like punkers and stuff like that. And so that was cool. And so that in that you had like that sort of consistency, like everybody kind of had like that look. And I suppose at the time you really just didn't, you looked different, right? Like you weren't like pedestrian. So there was something to be said about that in itself. I think that doesn't quite carry the same weight as it did now, because people like a lot of different kinds of music, and they don't have to they don't really need the trappings of subculture anymore in order to engage culture or to engage the subculture. I mean, like the people who still gravitate towards those optics, like the look of it, usually are a little bit older because their relationship to it is because you still used it as sort of an identifier, as like something that you're like, the way you sort of understand, you know, it's almost like, you know, it's like the reverse of objectivism, right? Like I know what I am by what I'm not. Like, you know, like so you know, like I know that I'm not that asshole over there. You know, and so the way that you can sort of understand that is by the clothes that you wore. And so then you're able to relate to people that way. And so like when you'd see bands earlier on, everybody kind of already had that. So I don't think it didn't need that same kind of weight. So then like kind of when even like when Nirvana did it, like when they kind of had that sort of throwaway look, like we're not, because they were like in response to like glam, like LA glam, which was like over the top, right? So they're just, this is ridiculous, you know? And so, but even at that time, like you still kind of felt like it was still the underground, if you want to call it that. Like, so it still wasn't like popular culture. Whereas like now it's like post 2000s, it's just like, everything's popular culture. Like you don't really have like everything that was like once, like I mean I can go into like the mall and hear The Cure and hear Bauhaus and hear like whatever, and hear like The Clash and hear every band that you've ever cared about, you know, like it's like that kind of, that's just mainstream, that's just music, that's just like that's safe music now. It doesn't mean that it's still not amazing, but it doesn't, the optics that went along with it that created that sort of cultural movement don't have the same weight anymore, because the actual sort of like edginess to it has already ran its course in society. So so now you have to kind of like use other sort of, I would say that you need other things. So like, so it's just like, okay, you don't have to look like, people don't have to look super punk or super whatever, you know, but there needs to be something on stage to distinguish yourself from, and you notice it. And so like a band like the Hives, that was a very like, they knew what they were doing. Like there was so much thought that went into it. And it was totally successful, you know. And I mean, like, even if you do like something that's like, even the way the Strokes did it, like where it was just like, it was because it was like, that was like, it was kind of before like that sort of do's and don'ts of Vice magazine kind of dictated what would become hipster culture, you know, like but before that really kind of took hold, you still had like, oh, this is like kind of what throwaway New York looks like right now. And the same way that the Ramones managed to accomplish it. I remember the first poster when the Strokes first came to Vancouver. And the reason we went and saw them, the album hadn't come out yet, was because the poster was just like their legs, and you just had jeans, and they were all wearing Chuck Taylors and stuff. And you just look at that poster and you're just like, okay, that's cool, man. Like, I mean, like, there's like, I don't even know if this band's any good, but I mean, like, whatever, like, and I realized that they fully had marketing teams and they had money backing them, and that's cool. But I mean, like, they were smart in the sense that they tapped into something in me, because I saw that poster and was thought to myself, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go check this band out. I don't know anything about them yet. I know that they're, you know, they're on a major label, but at that time, you know, I'm not really that dismissive to major labels, because a lot of my favorite records are on major labels. So it's just like, you know, in the 90s I was just like everybody, because it was just like, because that was the deal. But I mean, like by the time the 2000s were happening, you're not really thinking on those terms anymore.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Oh, I yeah. I mean, I just on a side note, I that first Strokes record, I still absolutely adore. I think I listen to it all the time.
It's a great record. It's a cool record. I like a couple of their records. Like, I mean, but yeah, but when that first record came out, it was just like, this is great. There was a whole string of bands. Like that was the last really that was the last really great sort of like rock and roll movement that happened. Right? So, like, I mean, like, you know, I guess you have like the you know, like the Black Keys and Black Lips and White Stripes and that kind of stuff that kind of kept it going into the 2000s. But by that point, it sort of like, it was something different. But that sort of that crossover into the early 2000s was awesome. Like and the British bands were really good. Like, because they kind of like took that sort of punk energy and elements of Britpop and managed to do it in a really cool way. I loved a lot of those bands, like Art Brut and they're really good. And I mean, definitely like the Future Heads and the Kaiser Chiefs were really good, the Libertines were really good, you know.
Right.
Yeah, those were all really great records when they came out, and you're just like, oh, this is so exciting. These records are exciting records, right? And then, and a lot of those bands were really good. The Futureheads were absolutely phenomenal when they played, and I think they're from Sunderland, which is also where the Toy Dolls were from. So that's like, because they came in, they did it like a thing they did it like an in-store, and like a kind of a hangout sort of thing at Scratch Records when I was working there.
Oh, cool.
And then when they played the show that night, and this was like I think this was the first time they played in Vancouver. So I think the second time they opened for the Franz Ferdinand, which was really good as well. But I mean,
yes.
But when they played that show in Vancouver, it was great because they did a Television Personalities cover, that Jeffrey Ingram song, and so like I got like the call out for that song, which I thought, because we had like they came into the shop and we like set up the shop with all these like dorky like we brought all these records from Sunderland so that they'd be like, oh, I think the Attics were from Sunderland too, right? Weren't they from Sunderland?
The who?
The Attics?
Oh, I don't know.
I think so. Anyways, it doesn't matter. I just remember we put up all these records, so they would get inside. They're like, "Oh," and they were like super excited with their cute little British accents and stuff, which I'm not going to do. But I mean, like, and anyways, we got on really good with them. They were a lot of fun, and they were so good, like because they had like those a cappella vocal parts, they're like 4-part harmonies leading into that song when they did that cover of Hounds of Love or whatever, that Kate Bush song, and the way that they would segue into it was like, this is crazy. This is total.
Yeah, it was so quick. They're so quick and tight,
Yeah. What a
great
that
band.
first record's so good. It still holds up.
Yes, I agree. Anyway, sorry, Josh, I don't even remember where we left off.
Oh yeah, I'm not good with your guys's. I'm not helping your.
I think Josh is. I think Josh trying to figure out where we were.
Sometimes you kind of have to throw out the script and just let the conversation go where it's gonna go.
Well, we can get to the script. Like, I mean, like, let's. No, okay.
Well, I did want to ask you about being a creative person and continuing to be a creative person at a certain age. It just feels like in the 70s, if you were a punk band, you had a punk band going for a few years, and then you changed the sound, and then there was not a lot of longevity for a punk group. In your case, I feel like you keep getting better and better through the decades. And Fashionism is like probably, I think, the coolest band you've been in. So I'm just wondering, what's your secret to being able to continue to make good music, in kind of in the middle age?
I don't know. I would say it's just like, never look back. Like it's like the biggest thing is like I mean, like whatever band is active or whatever you're doing, I just always think that band's gonna break. I never like, oh, this is the one. This is like, like, and I don't even know what that really means. Like, I don't even know to what degree that should even mean. But it's just like there's nothing worse to me than when someone's just like, oh yeah, I'm starting the band. Otherwise, oh, I'm just starting a punk band. Like when they say it like that, like you've already decided that it's just something. You've already dismissed yourself. You've already gone into like, as if, fuck that. Like if you play in a punk band, that's like the best band you can play in. Like think about why you love it. And it's because it totally rules. And it's just like your favorite records. Those are those records. Don't think that you have to somehow sell yourself short because you're deciding to do that. Like you're somehow like, like you can go into it where you're like, that's part of it. Like, I mean, like I do appreciate that. Like, yeah, I mean, like at this point now you're 40 years into a subculture that's just ingrained itself into culture. It's just part of everything. Just like, I think one of the questions you're talking about, like sort of mod culture or something like that. It's another one of those movements that the way it's sort of like, it transcends its own words, like when you think of like, like the term, like a term, like any of them, like goth or punk or mod or any of these sort of like big ep or metal, like any of these movements that like transcend decades, they no longer like have that same kind of impact as a word. But you sell yourself short if you think that like by choosing to be in a band that is embodying one of those, that somehow that's not still totally rad. And it's just like, and so therefore you should not be trying to make the best record. Like you should always be thinking, yeah, we're going to make a punk record. And it's just like, cool. and it's going to be better than London Calling.
Yeah, it reminds me of, gosh, I can't remember what song it is, but it reminds me of one of your lyrics. It says something to the effect of, just because it's been done doesn't mean it can't be done again.
Oh yeah, just because it's been done before, don't become done again.
Yeah.
But not, and that's in the Just Jeffrey. But I
Yeah.
think the line is actually making reference, but not as a do or as a don't. And it's like calling out like those sort of do's and don'ts from those Vice magazines, because it was just like, because they would always, like, those magazines were kind of neat, because at the time, if you recall, they would like have the do's and don'ts, and they would, like, when they first started doing it, because those guys who were doing that magazine were like kind of the same age as us, and so they were like, they fully were like enjoying, like, when those, initially they were like seeing younger people, and they were like taking pictures of people who were like younger, who were like having elements of the subcultures from previous generations that they liked. And so they would always like somebody would kind of like, oh, look, that person's totally got that kind of 60s vibe, and that person totally looks like a cool hip hopper from the 80s, and that person, all these kind of like moments in time that were important, and they would see somebody younger or somebody who would kind of nail it, and then they would give it, and then the don'ts would always be, well, whatever, it's just arbitrary, it doesn't even matter, it's not even a thing. But the idea, though, but the do's like ended up sort of giving people weight, and in some ways it's sort of like, and I'm not going to give them this much credit, but I would say that it did have an impact on why, like, the hipster movement that happened in sort of like the happened the way it did, because if you think, it was like this amalgamation of so many things that were rad, but somehow it wasn't right. But it was only not right because it was like that weird amalgamation of things. Somebody gives you props and you're just like, or somebody suggests something's rad and you're just like, cool, and then you go with it, and then you take it and you run with it yourself. And that's kind of what happened, which is why there was so many cool elements in that scene, but it was sort of messed up at the same time. It was sort of horrible at the same time, but it wasn't, but in it, though, it laid the groundwork, which is why so many people like so much cool music now. I kind of
Yeah,
like,
that's interesting.
because it got rid of those limiters. I mean, like, especially like kind of like, I think this kind of leads into like one of your guys' questions, because you're talking about sort of like those like late 70s and early 80s English bands. And but I was just buying records. This is all through the 90s, I guess, and stuff. And I was buying records that just, they were like the bands, like all the every band that starts with the, which was like all the endless sort of like power pop and new wave and sort of like that kind of, those punky kind of bands. But then you also had like the AOR bands that also had that going for them. And then you had like, and then you just had like, I don't know, there was just so many bands, and there was so many things that made them almost good. But and I do appreciate there's like marketing machines and stuff. They're like, oh, we got these dudes, and you're just like, you better shave off that mustache before we take the band photo, because no one, you know what I mean? I mean, there was, and just to show how real that was, there was like a point where I couldn't like bands when people had facial hair, because my logic at the time was like, if you can't be bothered to just shave, how can you possibly write a good song? I realize that there's some problems in that logic, but at the time, and this is like when I was young, and so for years I would like, for quite a few years I was just like, oh, if I'd like see a record, I'm like, I can't do it. And so like, and there's obviously like, it killed me, because it would be like the Stranglers were the obvious example, because I was like, oh, I'm like, I don't like this record, because what's with that mustache? Like, what is happening, dude? You're killing me. And same with like the Blitz too. Like, I couldn't handle the Blitz because when I saw a picture of him, that dude had that crazy little mind. I'm like, what is going on? In weird bleachy jeans, and you're like this skinhead dude with this weird mustache, and I'm like, I just can't do it. Like, I'm just like, oh god. But I've softened my blow on those things, because obviously I own all the Blitz and all the Stranglers records. When you think of things that like dictate a lot of our movements, like the way we engage like art, I guess, if you want to call it, or music and stuff, like there's a whole, like the way it engages our sexuality, or the way it engages our way of engaging that, is through those optics. And so like when we're looking at a record cover and you're thinking to yourself, like whatever, like, all those sort of like male fantasy stories that a lot of those records and a lot of the movies at that time were designed to create. They're like, okay, if you start a band and you look like this, this can happen for you, like, which is all a load of crap. And it's just like, I'm pretty problematic, really, like when we really break down what that entails. But it's like, but the records themselves, for any of us who were like looking at those records, we were buying into that. Like we were like, that social construct was absolutely in place for us. And we were like looking at those things and being like, yeah. And then so it's, once they get that hook in there, you don't want to let go of it. You want to like it because it actually taps into something slightly more primal for you. So you're like, and so like something like the songs, you're just like, oh, I want to like those songs. And you want to like it because you've already been tricked into like kind of being like, oh, well, this other sense has already told me, it's already given you the green light. And it's just like, and so being able to undo that, like undo something that you've already convinced yourself subconsciously as being a truth, is really tricky. It's like marketing 101, right? It's super sketchy the way that works. And it's just like, and you start to see like these different factors come in. And then when you catch it, you're just like, oh, wow. Like, and then you can see how that can be like weaponized. Not in a sense of like a weapon, but in the sense of like a way of sort of selling something to you, or like the way that's actually, and that's what they do, and then of course we get stuck in that, because it's just like, oh wow, the psychology of it is really wild,
So can I ask you? This is completely off the rails of what we're talking about, but I'm just curious. And if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to.
Okay.
Are you by any chance a teacher?
No.
Or in academics of any sort?
Yeah, I've gone to school and done plenty of like post-secondary education and stuff. But I mean, all my schooling's in history and that kind of stuff. So it's like, and I don't even use any of that school. I went to art school too. Like when I was a kid, like when I first graduated from high school, I went to art school. As you do, and then, but I didn't actually finish. I was really sick. I got like a tumor and died, and then like lived, obviously, because this is happening. But I was totally a disaster, and kind of like had like a total, that ended up being like a shift in sort of like why I ended up engaging more towards music versus like art. Because at the time I was like making like money painting and doing all that kind of stuff. And it was like, and I had like a bunch of things going with that. And then I got super sick, and then like had to go into the hospital for like, I don't know, however long. And then I have all sorts of crazy stories that go along with that, but whatever. And, and then after that, I was just like, oh yeah, I totally wanted something, and kind of ended up moving to Vancouver pretty shortly after that, and then just starting new bands. And I was already in bands at that point, but they were really secondary to me at that point. Like I was buying tons of music, and I was really engaged in playing in bands, but that was not the driving force for my sort of, like, I was also like, still being pretty driven by skateboarding at that point, because this is like, I was still, we were skateboarding every day and that kind of thing. And then you're still trying to be sponsored and do all that kind of stuff. And then, but I was actually fully on board with like getting into the arts. And so, but that aspect of the arts, like, and then, but that kind of like just derailed that, because I had to kind of drop out after a few years in because of that sickness. And then after that, I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to do, and I was already had some reservations, because like the art school I had a tough time with some of the way the art world worked. And ironically, like the music industry is equally as problematic. So the fact that like my great decision making was like, oh yeah, the art world's problematic, I should probably choose a less problematic industry to engage, like the music industry. And then, but that was what ended up happening. But I mean, anyways. So here we are.
I was wondering, just because the way you explain things, it seems like you've explained them many times before. I mean, it's the pictures you paint when you speak they're very clear, like they're very colorful. I was just wondering if maybe you've done that.
I haven't done that, but I mean, I guess that's just how I talk. I mean, I do like, I'm not sure. I'm assuming everybody does this though. Like, I mean, like, I just kind of go into it like every conversation, like that everybody's in the same place as you. So, and then, so like when you're talking about records, or when you talk about philosophy or politics or whatever you want to talk about, it's just like, I kind of like the idea that go into every conversation as if everybody's like an even playing ground. Like, don't discredit the audience, and unless you realize, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I should change the way the conversation goes a little bit, because the thing is, because you're way more likely to have a much more fun conversation if you just assume that they're totally in, and that they're, and like, there's nothing worse than when someone and that this is academia is horrible for this, when people when people talk to people, and it's just like, this is just classism, really. When people talk down to people based on their education, or based on their socioeconomic status, or those kind of things, when they actually change the way they communicate based on a preset notion of where somebody exists, or where they're at. And it's like, and so I just don't, or I try to. I'm sure I've done it. Everybody does. I don't claim to be perfect by any means, but but in general, I like to go into most conversations under the pretense that they're going to engage it, and and so, I guess that's just how I learned how to communicate. And so that's just how I talk. And I find that it ends up being much more fun, because the thing is, people are up for it.
Yeah.
I don't and this is just like a moot point, but it's just like, it gives some context to like when I'm out and about. Like, I don't drink or party as such, like with things. And I kind of like stopped doing that like in 1990, I think. And that was through a series. I partied pretty hard when I was like a teenager, and then it was just like, yeah, that's not going to go good. And then so I had to opt out. And then I had some stuff, like a few people died, and that kind of things kind of fucks you up a bit. And so you're just like, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not in. And then it just happened by chance that sort of the same time that was happening, the skateboard scene that I was in kind of got caught up in sort of the straight edge scene that was happening. And by no means was I part of that scene at all. But I did really sort of appreciate elements of it. Like, I mean, like, like I was listening to like those Gorilla Biscuit records and like those kind of things, and you're just kind of checking them out, and and to a degree, sort of Minor Threat and those kind of things. But I realize there's a gap in time between those records. But I mean, like, those are the records that you're checking out, and it sort of like set that kind of like, oh yeah, I can take some of that and go with it. But I mean, like, I never kind of gravitated towards I always found there was a certain elitism that existed within it, and it's not really elitism. It was almost like that, because you've made a choice to not do something, it therefore gives you this sense of leverage over people who choose to do something. And that's not across the board. I've met tons of people who are in that scene who fully don't engage it like that. They have they have a fully healthy vibe for it. But I've also met tons of people who don't, and they push it on you, and they push it on other people, and then they sort of set it up like that. And so where I'm heading with this, though, is that like, so I didn't go that route. And so, but then what ends up happening is you find yourself, you're always looking for the person when you go to shows, and especially once you become old enough to start going to bar shows, it's totally normal. Everyone drinks, and that's fine. And everybody does drugs. That's fine. Like, it's just part of the deal. And so, but if you're straight, or if you're sober at at a show, you can party with people who are drunk, and you fully can just slip into the groove kind of thing, like it's happening. But there is always sort of a threshold, because it's just like, I find that like I kind of, and Emily, my partner, she always makes fun of me because she says I get nunk, and that's like either like I like sort of like she's getting either like she's like smoking pot or getting drunk or whatever she's doing, and then I like just like can slip into the same. So as she gets more wasted, I get more wasted, and it's like, like, and that's like a way of sort of like always being able. But there is always sort of that threshold point, like when you're at a show, that you are looking for the person who's like up for the conversation, and like, and when you find that that's just the way you socialize, I assume that's sometimes a little bit much for some people. I'm sure there's tons of people who are like, oh, that fucking guy. Oh, don't get stuck. You'll get trapped in a conversation with him. And the next thing you're like, you thought that you were just going to, all you wanted to do was go outside and have a smoke. And then you go outside and this dude talking to you about whatever, right? Like something like all of a sudden, like, you take it. Cause I do appreciate that you what ends up happening is conversations go from like chill to something really intense in out of nothing. But I kind of love that. I love the idea that that communication doesn't like that we can do that, like that you can be like just at a club and you're talking about records, and then all of a sudden you're just talking about politics, and it's not a bummer. It's like, because you can pull out of that conversation, like, you know, like, and I find that like that to a degree is sort of like somewhat of a lost art, because mostly because so many things have become so polarized that like when those kind of conversations happen, people don't want to have the conversation anymore. They're much more inclined to sort of like, it's much more about like, this is my stance, this is
Right.
my perspective.
Right.
And which is unfortunate, because it's just like you can't solve things in that manner, you know, like we
Oh
know,
yeah.
you know, like, and so you know, like, so I guess I'm always looking for that conversation, you know, like I find that that's like a night out, like I want to see a band, like, I mean, like when the band's on, I'm always right at the front, you know, like not so much right now, I'm kind of like crippled these days. I'm getting like a double hip replacement pretty quick, which is going to be
What?
oh yeah, I'm fucked. Like it's just like I like whatever. I just like, because I like some of it's genetic, but I like skateboarded and played. I was playing like second division men's soccer for quite a long time too. Like kind of like I got really into that sort of in like the later 90s, and then I was like, that was like, so I'd like be going skateboarding all day, and then you go and I'd have like football or soccer, like not football of course, but I'd be playing soccer. Can you imagine me playing football? Yeah. You're like, I'm like the dude like that, like, you know, like the sand that in the back of Archie comics and stuff like that. And he's like, you know, like, you know, anyways,
right. Yeah, in the burying halfway.
yeah, the burying in the sand. It's just like, not really though. I can hold my own, but I mean, like but the point being, it's just like I'm not a large human, so you know, like I don't need to tackle anybody, you know. So, anyways, but I can, you know, I can play soccer. So that's all right. You know, you don't need to be big to play soccer. It's great, you know. But the point being is that you're always so you're always looking for those conversations, and so like when you're sort of mentioning like, do you teach or anything like that, I just kind of find that this is like no matter where you're at, that's the exciting thing. Like, what's this conversation going to be? I'm going to go see the show, and it's just like you're just like, I don't know what this night's going to end up like. Am I going to have like some crazy, you know, next level philosophical debate with somebody like in the smoking pit? Like that to me is like an exciting night. Like that's like going out, and the other thing too is like I'm like I've never been sort of like driven by like the hookup when you go out. I've always found that was weird for me. Other people don't. Like if that's how you engage things, that's cool.
Well, Jeffrey, we've taken a lot of your time, and I know you said you were going to a show. Before we go, however, I just want to ask you real quick. You mentioned the Tranzmitors never really breaking up, and I noticed you guys have been playing shows here and there. I just want to ask you, are there new
we're making
songs?
We're making a new record. We've been recording a bunch. I mean, like, and so like that's we're just working on a new record. I mean, like that band fell into a neat spot because it was like, I mean, the irony of that band, and just so you know, there's no I don't care. Like, I mean, there's no limiters on time. Like, I mean, I can go. I'll go to shows later. Like, I mean, it's like, you know, it's fine. But as far as like the Tranzmitors were, the Tranzmitors initially actually was just going to be a band to play the Clones record. I'm not sure if you guys are, because I don't know that you didn't mention that, the Jeffy Genetic and the Clones record, which was like, so that was so the Jeffy Genetic and the Clones record that came out after the Newtown Animals. So that record came out on Dirt Nap, and
what?
Yeah,
I am completely unaware of this.
Go if you look it up. There's like videos and stuff. It was like, that might actually have been the best-selling record I did. I think the Tranzmitors sold more records made more records for sure, because we were like on Stiff Records and stuff. So that band actually had like a bunch of crazy stuff happen to it. But that Clones record was like, for a band that didn't do anything, it has like multiple releases, and it's like there's European versions of it. It's called Killed by Jeff and stuff. It's like, and then, anyways, so it's like, anyway. So once you're done, you can look up that record. It's like, there's 2 albums worth of material that came out as the Jeffy Genetic and the Clones records. One of them's called that, and it's just a Dirt Nap record, which is easy to get. And then one of them was called Killed by Jeff, which is like the second record, which is like the Dirt Nap record and a whole other EP worth of stuff. Anyway, so the Transmitters initially was just because it was Nick and Bryce who were in the Smugglers, and so I knew them from touring with the Smugglers, and then I was like, oh, I want to play like this. I want to do a clone show, and so we're like, oh, okay. And then our friend Fergus, who started the band with us, and Fergus was like in this like punk band from Vancouver called Emergency. Fergus is an older guy from Scotland, and he was actually in like an old punk band called The Strike. And they were on like one of those. They're awesome. He's great, and I'm actually going to see him because he's gonna be at the show like in 2 weeks. And but they were on like one of those first strength through Oi comps. Like you know that first strength through Oi comp with the dude with no shirt on. He's like like he's doing like that weird fist pump thing. I think they're on that first one. He ended up in Vancouver and then started this band Emergency, which was like funny because it was like Emergency was just like, anyways, I'll just derail this conversation if I allowed that whole other lineage story to take but like so then anyways, Fergus and I got on super good, so we decided I was like, oh, Fergus, you can play in this clones thing. And then but I had like a couple brand new songs that I wanted to learn, so we started learning those songs. And then we just decided, well, actually let's just, because the way that we were playing them was different, because like the clones had a lot of synths and stuff on it. Like it was like and then this, we didn't have a keyboard player yet. So we were just learning all the songs just as like with the guitars at this point. And then we kind of liked the way they sound. So we're like, you know what, forget that. Let's just start a new band. So then we just, so the clones, because of it, never played a show ever. But we ended up starting the Transmitters, and that was just became what that was. And then I think a few songs that were clone songs ended up becoming part of like the Tranzmitors. They ended up on the first record, but ultimately totally just a whole different project.
Cool. So you guys are in the recording process, or you guys?
Yeah, we're mostly writing. I mean, like Mikey has like a little studio, which is pretty handy, and so we've demoed lots of things at this point. Like, it's in various states, but there's a whole bunch of new songs. And like in between, because I had just before Plague happened, I had like a new band that was happening too called the Syncromantics, and it's sort of that band was with Emily and my partner Emily, and I was, it was exciting because we were doing something, but it was like one of those things, and I'm not sure other people had this happen to them, I guess, but like that band played one show like in November of 2019, and then the Tranzmitors actually played a show in Spain, and then but I hadn't played any of the shows, and then Plague happened, so we didn't do anything, and then we didn't do anything for 2 years. We had recorded just before that, and then so there was like a test pressing for that. The test pressing ultimately got rejected because of the test pressing got rejected, and so then the band was sort of in limbo for 2 years because of Plague, really. Yeah. And then when we started getting back into it, I was like in this headspace where I'm just like, it was like almost like it almost felt weird to start that band up again, because it like it didn't really get any momentum. And then it's like, so now this band's 3 years old and it's played one show and it hasn't done anything. That just seems sort of counterproductive to me. And so I kind of and like, I'm just like, yeah, I'm not into it. And it's like, and then kind of at the same time, the Tranzmitors were able to start practicing again. So that's kind of, it just sort of like, there's never a point where there wasn't a band happening. It's neat how it just sort of organically happens. But I mean, like, when you look at it from far, it seems like there's these gaps, or sometimes there's not really gaps, but there's no gaps in between, like one band takes like a slight break and then that Just Jeffrey record, like if I, and going way back, because I mean, like the first bands I was playing in the mid 90s, I mean, like the first band I was in was this band called the Disfigurines, and that band put out this record called Punk's Dead, You're Next. Which was it was like a Fugazi thing or something. I can't remember exactly how that I
like that.
But it like but that band like lucked out, because it was like that band was happening in the interior in Kamloops. I realized this is really not good for your timeline, so I'm super sorry, Josh, if you're the one who do editing. So like,
well, Jay has to do the editing. So
okay, well,
we'll leave it all up to
oh well, then since I've already apologized to you, Josh, I'm not going to apologize to you, Jay. Instead, we're going to be like, oh man, that's too bad. Okay, So this was so that record came out like in '94 or something like that. But it was like a really neat time to come out because there was because it was sort of like I mean that band like at the time we're like, oh, I really wanted to do a band that was kind of like the Forgotten Rebels or something like that. That was like I was really thinking that was going to be good. And then but it didn't really sound like that. But we were also listening to a lot of the Lookout stuff at that point. So it definitely that band had like a bit more of a pop punky kind of feel to it. But it was like the perfect time because all those bands were touring through, and there weren't a lot of bands that sounded like that happening at the time. So we played with everybody. So we played with like Face to Face and Queers and Mr. T Experience and every one of those Lookout bands, every one of those sort of fat bands that were coming through. So it was actually like a great sort of introduction into playing in bands because you instantly are playing tons of shows, and that band toured a bunch too.
Interesting. Gosh, yeah. Okay. There's a lot of notes I'm gonna have to look up here.
Yeah, There's two, but there's a Japanese Disgustings, and there was and there was us. So just when you're looking up that band, and it's spelt the way like the Teenage Head spelling, like teens, or like or like the Slade, the Sweet song, like like this, like that kind of thing. Or who was it? Who was it that did like the Disgusting Teenage Head have it? But it was like. It wasn't. It was like because it was like a spoof off of like a Sweet song, which was like was it like Brian Eno? Like who was it that had like that the doesn't matter. I'm just like I'm trying to solve some kind of like weird record nerd moment. Let's not worry about it. Anyways, you see, to answer your story or your question, yes. So now the Tranzmitors are doing stuff again and just gonna make another record. So that's kind of where that's at. So that's like the busy project again. So that band's practicing lots and playing shows. So it's fun.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait to hear that. Josh, do you have anything for Jeffrey?
I think we've covered most of the material. I think
so.
Are rock solid.
Want me to reference the list for you? I'm joking. As you guys are like, you're actually like, we have been talking to you for like 2 hours. Like, what?
Well, what I think we're gonna do is, I think this is gonna be a two-parter. If that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
No, I like that. We've talked to people for a long time, and I regret cutting these conversations down. I wish I would have done more. Put them as two parts before, but I think I'm definitely gonna do that with this. But anyway, as we wind things down, and if you don't mind, we can chat a little bit after we end the recording. But where can people go, Jeffrey, to hear or buy your music?
Oh, I don't know. I'm actually if you do recall, this is like a good sort of like bookend for our conversation.
Okay.
We started this conversation with me having tech issues due to being able to download Google Chrome or whatever I had to get. And so me telling you how to get our records online is like, I don't know. I only listen to the records. So it's just and this became problematic because I went to learn a song that we had done years ago, that when we came up with a set list for one of these shows coming up, and somebody was just like, oh yeah, why don't we learn that song? And it was like one of Mikey's songs. And I went to I'm like, okay, I'll relearn it. And I hadn't played that song in like 12 years or something like that. So I was like, oh, fuck. And I went to YouTube just to try and find it. And the song wasn't on YouTube. So I'm like, oh, wow. And I had to and unfortunately, the Tranzmitors singles, I have a closet full of records as well. And for whatever reason, I didn't have I couldn't access, and they were and we're kind of navigating moving and a few things. So I had to find this record. And it was just the point is that you're asking me where to find my own records, and I couldn't even find one of my own. So what your takeaway from this is, ask anyone else in the band except for me. They're all super accessible and much more tech savvy than me. Maybe not nearly as pleasant to talk to you. That's not true. But I'm sure that everything's available on Discog, I guess. I'm sure. I have no idea where you could get any of the things online. Just steal it somewhere. I don't care.
Bandcamp.
Yeah,
Fashionism and
Fashionism
Transmitters both
Oh yeah,
have band
fashion.
names.
If you're gonna buy Fashionism, get it from Neo and Taste, like from Josh.
Josh is
He's rad,
sure.
and he like works hard. So try and at least make his life easier. So Fashionism stuff is like, I think you can still get a couple of the Fashionism singles.
Yes, you
Um,
can.
The rest of the band, everything else, like that Clones record is long gone. Those are, I don't even know where those exist. I do have copies of the Just Jeff record. If somebody wants that, they can send me a message. I have one little box of those left. Tranzmitors records are all no, that's not true. I'm lying. So we just came across a box of that EP that came out on Deranged. It was like one of those, when you hear about missing boxes and stuff. Yeah, it was one of those. One of those just recently, like 2 weeks ago, we came across one of those missing boxes stories. So it's just like, so apparently now we have like 40 copies of that EP, which was essentially out of print for years at this point.
Oh,
So that's exciting for anybody who's at the next couple shows that you can buy that.
wow, that's great. So, just real quick, so is Lottie Dog gone?
I think
Like-
so. Yeah, yeah, they are, because Tim and Dale are like, I think that label kind of just ran its course. I think it kind of, the Ballantines kind of were, it sort of imploded on them when that band was sort of happening, and it was like, and I think they just burnt out. Like it was like it was kind of one of those cases where like they got into it, and it was like they really tried to make a go at it, and then sunk a lot of money into it, and we're putting out a lot of releases, and then it just like it's just like anything, like you overdo it and you put out too much stuff, and then it just like, you're kind of hoping it's kind of like you can either get to that next stage where it can become a functioning label, or you keep it as like a hobby. And if it's as a hobby, you're not losing money, and it doesn't matter because you're not sinking enough into it for it to be problematic. But if you want to get it to that next stage, and it's tricky because in order to get distribution, you need to have like enough releases coming out to warrant the distribution. Mind you, all of that is out the door now, because like that's not really the world that we live in anymore. But when La Di Da was kind of making that push in the earlier part of the 2000s, you still had a CD market. You still had you still had tangible markets, like physical item markets, and you still had some of the chain stores, and so that whole part of the industry was still happening. But it fell apart. It felt, the whole, when it fell out for a lot of people, and I think that was one of the labels too. Like, they weren't established enough already to kind of make a go of it, and then when sort of the industry fell out, it was just like, what do you do?
Yeah. They were really supportive of. I used to do a blog called Audio Ammunition, and they would send us all their stuff, and they were just seemed like really cool people to deal with.
They are cool people. Yeah, I mean, Dale's helped do. He's been involved with a ton of releases that I've done, like with helping with the artwork and stuff. He's a clever little graphic artist guy and stuff. And so, I mean, like, yeah, they're great guys. And they put out a ton of records. They were really great supporters of Vancouver at that time.
Yeah, a lot of great records they put out.
And so for a chunk of time, though, they were like a real happening, because it was sort of like there was like a bit of a gap left, because Mint was sort of in limbo, or that's what it seemed. It seemed like Mint was just looking for something different. That's not really fair to say. Mint was, because Mint kind of had like, they kind of went in that direction with like the New Pornographers and sort of Nico Case, and New Pornographers were huge. Like they totally blew up, like proper huge. And then of course, like, like Scratch was, and I was working at Scratch when all this was taking place too. And Scratch was putting out all those Destroyer records and the Black Mountain records. And a lot of those bands became kind of like sort of like indie darling bands, coming into, they're all very different bands. But I mean, like, I think, Destroyer's on Merge now, or have been for a number of years. I think so are New Pornographers, aren't they? I
believe so.
So they got really into, like, so they did well for themselves. But I mean, at the time, those were like big Vancouver bands that were like based in Vancouver, like they were based on Vancouver labels, and so you still had that kind of like that that community side to it was still happening. Like once a band gets to a certain stage and they kind of like, because they have to be able to kind of make that jump in order to sort of move their career along, or whatever you want to call it. You just gravitate towards something that can offer you whatever it does. And so a lot of those sort of big bands from that chunk of time, they all, if they didn't break up, they like made that jump. And so La Di Da suddenly filled up this void, and they were picking up all these sort of smaller bands and up and coming bands and other bands down the West Coast. And so they had a bunch of really cool releases, and so they were really active in the scene for a few years there.
Yeah, that's too bad. Yeah, they were a great label. Well, Jeffrey, let me read our outro spiel here and
Okay.
stick around and we'll chat a little bit longer. Well, like I always joke to Josh, for the real interview. So I want to thank Mr. Jeffrey Pop for sitting down and chatting with us. And I want to thank you, the listener, for tuning into our humble broadcast. If you like what you've heard, please hit that subscribe button. And if possible, leave us a review of the podcast. Not only does it help our show, of course, but it also helps out all the wonderful guests and helps spread the word on their material, on their music. And once again, go and seek out Tranzmitors, Fashionism, Newtown Animals, and the new band that I just discovered that Jeffrey was in. What was that again, Jeff? The Clones, Jeffrey Genetics and the Clones.
Jeffrey Genetics and the Clones. I'll send you like a song or something like that, just so you can take a listen to it or whatever.
Oh man, that'd be awesome. Yeah.
You'll probably like that band. I mean, if you like the other bands, you're gonna. I mean, it's not like it. You know, I didn't go off the rails on that one. Let's just say.
Cool,
like,
man.
yeah.
I still look forward to listening to that.
Yeah.
So, on behalf of the Born Too Late podcast, I am Jay.
And this is Josh.
And we are signing off.